You're listening to CLE Rocks, the music podcast from the birthplace of rock and roll. If you like what you hear, please hit the subscribe button and leave a review on the podcast platform of your choice. Now, on with the show. During the second half of 1991, bands like Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, Mudhoney, and Pearl Jam were generating a buzz out of Seattle. The music world was beginning to take notice as the band that would become the biggest of the bunch was about to explode. This is the story of how Kurt Cobain and Nirvana made their way to a small music club in Cleveland in October 1991, performing in front of a few hundred people weeks before Nirvana became the biggest band in the world. The buzz surrounding Nirvana began with Bleach. The album, released in 1989 on Sub Pop Records, sold a mere 40,000 units in the first 2 years after its release. But critics and fans who had been following the emerging Seattle music scene saw something in the punk-influenced three-piece. Photographer Bill Kagi was in Ohio in 1991 when he saw Nirvana live in Cleveland.
We were just big Sub Pop heads, and so we knew about Nirvana, and Bleach came out, it was a couple of years before that, and I just loved the heck out of that, and my friend was in like the Sub Pop Singles Club, so you'd get all the 7 inches of things, and just the stuff that wasn't being released on albums, but we loved the heck out of Bleach. He named his dog Bleach. I guess it was the roughest, like, catchy music that you could find. I think it was so kind of raw and visceral, but at the same time just like full of hooks and full of catchiness.
On September 16th, 1991, Nirvana kicked off its biggest tour yet in Seattle. The release of the band's sophomore album, Nevermind, would follow on September 24th. Just 2 weeks into the tour, the band would arrive at Cleveland's Empire Concert Club. The show was part of a series of small club gigs Nirvana continued to play as airplay increased on MTV for Nevermind's lead single, Smells Like Teen Spirit, something the band seemed mostly unaware of, says Nick Soulsby, author of I Found My Friends, The Oral History of Nirvana, and the book Cobain on Cobain.
It shows how strange an event it was that the entire tour they're on that October in the US is still these tiny venues, because the mechanisms of the industry haven't caught up with the fact that this is becoming a massive phenomenon. So the venues are genuinely not in tune with the kind of scale of audience that Nirvana suddenly has. But it's that reality that no one, I think, saw it coming. There are things that could be said to have foreshadowed it. There's a long tail of alternative, underground, punk-influenced bands and Seattle bands as well, who were being signed to majors and had major label albums coming out in the year to year and a half before Nevermind. There's quite a lot already going on, but none of them become this kind of, multi-platinum selling global event.
Nirvana's rising star made for a unique environment on October 10th. Some were there at the Empire Concert Club to see what all the fuss was about. Others, like photographer Matthew Fanciana, had been on board with Nirvana since Bleach, but was now seeing his favorite indie band sell out a venue in a matter of minutes.
The show was packed. It was wall-to-wall people. The album had only been out for like 2 weeks at that point. And they were shocked how many people were there. It was a big deal, but we had seen other Seattle or Sub Pop bands on tour, and there were like 20 people at these shows. So I was shocked to see how many people were at the show.
Nirvana's show at the Empire Club opens about as inconspicuously as you can imagine. Drummer Dave Grohl bangs away before bassist Chris Novoselic jumps into the bass line for Queen's Another One Bites the Dust. jam lasts just a few seconds before Kurt Cobain introduces a surprising opening number.
This song was written by a band called the Vaselines. They're from Scotland. They're really good at the
But there was a method to the madness, says Soulsby.
The Cleveland show, they begin the show with Jesus Wants Me for a Sunbeam. And this seems like quite a deliberate phase. There's a phase after this where they start each show with a guitar version of a piece of classical music. And it's literally because there's been always surges when they open a gig, so crowds immediately going wild. So they deliberately start with a slower and calmer piece of music just to kind of get the audience under control. And then they start to ratchet up the pressure. That's a very strange thing. There's certain phases where they will play certain songs in certain positions or finish in certain ways. There's other times where they're trying to control the mood in the room. So there's a lot of intelligence behind what they were doing and when they were doing it. It wasn't just a case of these were their favorite songs at that moment. There is a bit of that, obviously. But there was also a desire to make the experience of an audience a particular way. Later on, you can see when Cobain is unhappy with an audience because he will punish them in funny ways. He'll do things like not play Smells Like Teen Spirit. There's a show where he teases that song repeatedly but never plays it. So he's deliberately withholding from the audience the thing they want. So yeah, this isn't just a sort of thoughtless outburst of energy. There is musical intelligence beneath that.
Cobain's introduction of the Vaselines' Jesus Wants Me for a Sunbeam would mark one of the few times during the show the frontman would engage in banter with the crowd. In fact, Novoselic would do more talking, which would be a trend throughout Nirvana's career. Cobain, being a reluctant rock star, thrust into the spotlight when he'd much rather fade into the background.
The reality of the band were they were very honest and on the level kind of people. There wasn't some sort of public image versus private image. They were the same people on stage as off, etc. So the thing I most noticed, and it was funny that this remained true when I did the Cobain on Cobain book, which was collecting interviews with Kurt Cobain. The main thing I noticed is this sense of quite a quiet guy who there's all this energy on stage. Then there's Kurt sitting quietly in the back of a room, uncomfortable with a crowd or not necessarily putting himself forward or speaking up. There's an awful lot of Christ Novoselic almost kind of shielding Cobain from the attention. Christ is a much more gregarious character at the time and in many ways much more the public face of the band. So when I did the interview book, you see it quite overtly that Kurt might pop up in an early interview when they interviewed mainly as a group. Christ would actually dominate the airtime a lot of the time. Then Kurt would have something specific he wanted to say and would come in with that piece, would say what he wanted to say and then step back again. That seemed to remain true in the interviews, that lots of people have been very lovely encounters with him, but this certain distance, this certain degree of privacy, a certain shyness to him as a character.
The first of its own songs Nirvana played during the Empire gig was Aneurysm. The song was a B-side to Smells Like Teen Spirit, but never worked its way onto a proper studio album. Aneurysm was written in 1990 and recorded during Nirvana's first session with new drummer Grohl. It was around this time that Eddie King Roser, guitarist for alt-rock band Urge Overkill, first saw Nirvana perform live.
I'd seen them play at Uptown in Minneapolis when they were out for Bleach, and it was just another band that was playing. I remember thinking, 99% of the guys come through here cannot sing. The one thing I remember about this band is they've got a guy who can sing. And it was that I didn't even really register that fact and only sort of later. I was sort of like, when I heard the record, I'm like, oh, it's that guy and he can sing. That was the thing that definitely carried Nirvana over the top from very first impressions I had. Is like most singers, frankly, you didn't want to hear them sing. They were either delusional or they were up there because somebody had to do the singing. Nobody really wanted to. You just picked the guy who'd be willing to do it. And there was Nirvana. It really was different because it was obviously somebody who had a gifted and had a really consistent. He sort of had worked out his signature sound.
Urge Overkill was one of two opening acts at Nirvana's Cleveland show. New York City band Daz Damon was the other. Singer-guitarist Jim Walters remembers running into Nirvana in New York City that summer.
We knew a bunch of the guys in Nirvana. We knew Dave Grohl from when he was in this band Scream from back in the day, and we had played a gig with them, I think, in Amsterdam. And myself and a couple of my roommates had this big sort of like loft-style apartment in Brooklyn, and we would have these big parties on Eastern Parkway, and we had one night, and like a bunch of the, it was like a scene, a bunch of the guys from Sonic Youth and people in bands we knew, and Nirvana happened to be in town. I think they were mastering Nevermind, and we saw them. We were like, "How's it going, guys?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, we're gonna like tour," and we're like, "Oh yeah, us too." And they were like, even from when they came out, there was always like a buzz about them. Like everyone always thought they were kind of like a special band. Kurt was definitely like a unique character. I mean, I didn't know him super well, but knew him a bit, and he was definitely kind of operated on his own frequency. He was a really unique guy. I don't think anybody could have predicted what happened, but I think everyone thought if there was any band out of this whole bunch that's going to be successful, they probably would have picked them.
Nirvana was indeed on the verge of making it, thanks to Nevermind, though fans at the Empire Club would have to wait until 4 songs in to hear one of the tracks from Nirvana's new album. The band's performance of Drain You began with Novoselic on vocals before Cobain takes over. Expectations for Nevermind were initially modest for both Nirvana and its new record label DGC. However, as MTV continued to play the video for Smells Like Teen Spirit seemingly non-stop, both the single and album would rise up the charts at an unprecedented fashion. More reviews, all positive, poured in. During the years that followed, Nevermind would be hailed as a seminal album, responsible for sparking a new rock renaissance.
Nevermind is the perfect combination of everything that would make someone want to buy an underground record, but with a lot of the values and shine that people look for from a mainstream record. It had the promotional mechanisms behind it. It had the production values. It had the kind of big, I guess I could compare it to Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction. A lot of people bought Guns N' Roses' first album because of Sweet Child of Mine. I mean, my aunt owned it, and she would never listen to it because she didn't like most of what the band stood for. But that one song was their big pop moment. Nirvana, a lot of people buy Nevermind because of Smells Like Teen Spirit being a perfect hard rock pop / punk song. And it manages to cover all those things. So it's all there. Nirvana would have been a big phenomenon in the underground, whatever year they came out. I think there's just this special moment where the world was ready for something to change, where there were enough people had come up into the radio stations, the magazines, TV stations, etc., who grew up on underground bands, that suddenly it was possible for them to get a mainstream hearing, and that maybe wouldn't have ever happened before.
The majority of material played during Nirvana's show in Cleveland came from Nevermind and Bleach. In a way, Smells Like Teen Spirit was an afterthought at Nirvana's Cleveland gig, performed 7th in a set list of 20 songs. Stories have been told about how Smells Like Teen Spirit was planned to be just an appetizer from Nevermind. The marketing team at DGC saw another track as the potential song that could break Nirvana, remembers Urge Overkill's Roser.
Back then, there was a whole system with MTV, and the labels would try to get a song on MTV. And the way that the people at backing Nirvana and the label were thinking, well, we're going to put out Teen Spirit, but the real big hit is going to be the next one, Come As You Are, which I think they maybe had done I don't know if they'd done the video or whatever, but that was going to be the big song. It was kind of a last minute thing because it was kind of recorded at the last minute as well, Teen Spirit. So nobody knew it was going to take off and be sort of the biggest song.
Come As You Are would be part of a string of singles that would cement Nirvana's instant legendary status, alongside Lithium and In Bloom. But in typical Cobain fashion, the band chose to close its Cleveland gig with Territorial Pissings, a raucous album cut from Nevermind.
It was awesome. It was total energy. The crowd was going crazy with every song. Kurt stage dove into the audience, so he dove into the audience and was carried by the crowd to the back, kind of by maybe about 20 feet out, then back to the stage. And it was just, I feel like the show went by in a blur. We knew we saw something special that night.
Nirvana's Cleveland show would mark one of the final, modest showcases for a band that was approaching superstardom. 2 nights later in Chicago, Lyle Hansen of Das Daemon noticed a major change.
But when we got to Chicago and we played the Metro with Nirvana, that's when we knew it was over. Because we've played the Metro before and we've played Chicago a bunch. It was always like a good show for us. Playing Chicago was always great. And we played that show, I remember crickets. But I do have a friend that I've met recently, over the years, who was a young person at that show, and she just said to me, yeah, we were just standing around waiting for Nirvana to go around. And on. And that was the vibe of that point. Felt like, oh yeah, they are on a different level now.
The experience was much of the same for Urge Overkill, who would rejoin Nirvana during the European tour in November. By that point, Nirvana had become the biggest rock band in the world.
Teen Spirit hit, it was just like people could not control themselves. Once they heard the beginning of that song, didn't matter what country you were in. It was instant insanity. It was clear that everybody knew all the songs on that record by the time we had got to Europe, and people were singing along. And it was just like, it was almost like the mayhem was almost Beatles-like.
For fans like Fasciana, seeing Nirvana just days before the band would explode all over MTV feels almost surreal.
It was definitely shocking to see. It was a weird time because there were, in 91, if you look at the albums that came out, we were stoked about every band that came out. That we couldn't believe that Pearl Jam's record, Soundgarden's Bad Motorfinger, we were all in on the grunge and Seattle scene. So to us, these bands, it's kind of a weird perspective, but in a way, these bands were already rock stars to us. But then it was shocking to see the album taken off. When they played Saturday Night Live, was a big deal. And then the music magazine started coming out. I was like, oh my God. And then, we realized, holy shit, we were there.
Nirvana's newfound fame would fall squarely on Cobain's shoulders. The reserved singer-songwriter was now the face of popular music. Cobain's addiction to heroin and tumultuous relationship with fellow rock star Courtney Love brought new meaning to the dark and honest lyrics fans found themselves drawn to, recalls Soulsby.
I think his raw honesty, I think that sense that you were genuinely listening to the psychological conflicts of an individual, I think that's where it's really at. And I think that's very uncommon. What we actually see with most artists is you write a song, then you have to pretend it has meaning the 100th time you've sung it, the 200th time you've sung it. It has to be a broad sentiment that other people can sing.
On April 8th, 1994, Kurt Cobain's body was discovered at his Seattle home. He was dead by suicide at age 27. Cobain's death would rock the music world. Still, Urge Overkill's Roser calls watching Nirvana in the weeks following Nevermind's release the greatest experience of his life. It brings to mind brighter memories of a three-piece band from Aberdeen, Washington that conquered the world.
We played in Rome, and that by that time, they had been, after the Rome show, we sort of found out that they had overtaken Michael Jackson for the #1 spot on Billboard. It went from like, maybe we'll sell as many records as Sonic Youth, maybe, to #1 on Billboard in a matter of months. And it was a big celebration. I remember they all went out on scooters. And in Rome, you can rent these scooters and go out. And they went out with all their crew and all that. They were out on those after the show. They were out all night on these. And, you know, it was this big triumphant moment. And I remember Kurt saying, that's literally the most fun I've ever had in my life.
Thank you for listening to CLE Rocks. For more episodes, check out our page on Acast, Apple, Spotify, and other platforms. I'm Troy L. Smith. Until next time.